Welcome back, everyone. So we will gonna discuss the continuation of personas and goals. So here, persona versus profiles. Unfortunately, all too often, the authors have seen user profiles that reflect Webster's definition of profile as a brief biographical sketch. In other words, user profiles often consist of a name and picture attached to a short, mostly demographic description, along with a short paragraph of information unrelated to the design task at hand. So, the user profile is actually just a demographic description, short paragraph with demographic uh, description, and it's unrelated to the design task at hand because again we are determining the reason for the behavior, not the customer characteristic. Just like what we've discussed in the previous book, the characteristics or the people does not is not important. The scenario is what's more important. The behavior driving that person, because those person could be the same person in different behavior patterns. So it's kind of like a complex because later we will discuss what's the reason for that, because most often, like a character could, like we are the most complex in the universe, so we could be the same person with different behaviors. So it's kind of like hard to um, design on a context based on our characteristics description, because no one really knows us except ourselves, right? Even ourselves, it's hard for us to really understand our behavior and attributes. So I know it's kind of deep, but you're gonna see, because this is a long chapter, and we will gonna try to understand that complexity. Um, for example, describing the kind of car this person drives, how many kids he has, where he lives, and what he does for a living. This kind of user profile is likely to be based on a stereotype. Although we give our personas names and sometimes even cars and family members, these are employed sparingly. Supporting fictive details plays only a minor part in persona creation. It is just enough to make the persona come to life in the minds of the designers and product team. So those things could be part of the fictive details. So even the demographics, the so and so facts about people could be fictive in case of persona identification, because we're just concerned on specific behavior in specific contexts. We don't care whether they are pilot, doctor, or whether they have though I mean we care, but those does not determine our design direction. It's the why or the goals which we will discuss later. Personas versus market segments. The main difference between market segments and design personas is that the former are based on demographics, distribution channels, and purchasing behavior, whereas the latter are based on usage behavior and goals. So personas are based on behavior and goals. So remember in the previous video, the customer does not really know what why they want what they want. So we need to decipher that That's the difference of market segment. So market segment and design persona is that former, or the market segment is based on demographics, distribution channels, and other purchasing behavior that marketing got. So marketing persona shed light on the sales process, whereas personas shed light on the product definition and development process. However, the market segments play a role in persona development. They can help determine the demographic range within which to frame the persona hypothesis. However, a market segment still play a role because those are important, just like in persona hypothesis. So those could be the basis of our initial interview, but we still need to be open, be inductive before we could be deductive in qualifying the user. Because the reason why we does interview is to be open instead of close-minded. So personas are segmented along range of usage behavior, not demographics or buying behavior. So it's about usage pattern. Why are they using instead of buying behavior? So there's seldom a one-to-one mapping of market segments to personas. Rather, market segments can act as an initial filter to limit the scope of interviews to people within target markets. So this market segment is important. It will determine how big our customers, but that in itself is not the design focus or the design context, because that is one of the reason is that is too broad. Also, it just leads to more questions than answers. So here, as you can see, market segments, segment 1, segment 2, segment 3. Pool of interviewees, so we get from that market segment. Then we derive a persona from usage pattern. Kate and Sarah are in segment 1, Bob overlaps segment 2 and 3, Anne is segment 3. So rather, market segments can act as an initial filter to limit the scope of interviews to people within target markets. Also, we typically use the prioritization of persona as a way to make strategic product definition decision. See discussion of persona types later in this chapter. So, we prioritize the persona as a way to make strategic product definition decision. So we prioritize this to make a strategic product definition decision. So later we will prioritize what persona are important to that design context based on our market segments. Of course, this is still important, the market, but when it comes to design, we're designing based on the people that use that specific context. So we're trying to filter the people that are using those interfaces, because remember again, it's hard to A/B test, just like what we've learned in the previous book. So we want to be as concrete as possible on the people that we are designing and the features or interface that we want to design, so or redesign. Personas versus market segments. Market segments can be used in the research phase to limit the range of personas to target markets. However, there is a seldom one-to-one mapping between market segments and personas. Understanding goals. Personas provide the context for sets of observed behavior. So, Personas allows us to organize that behavior pattern. The new inductive and deductive we found from user research. Goals are the drivers behind those behaviors. So in each those behavior pattern, which we're gonna see this later, I think um, could be best if we could see it now here. So these are the things that important to our context. For example, uh, or attributes such as service-oriented, price-oriented, necessity-only, entertainment. So these are the attributes that we will get from user research. So based on that, that will determine our let's see. Context for set of observed behaviors. So that's where we will get our persona. Goals are the drivers behind those behaviors. User goals serve as a lens through which designer must consider a product's function. So a user, it's different from a customer, is where we will design the functions of the interface. So goals motivate usage patterns. So the reason why the user use the product because of the goal. The reason why it has this behavior that keeps coming back, that becomes habitual, is because of the goal. People's or personas' goals motivate them to behave as they do. Thus, goals don't just provide an answer to why and how personas want to use a product, they also can serve as a shorthand in the designer's mind for the sometimes complex behavior in which persona engages, and therefore for their tasks as well. Goals should be inferred from qualitative data. You usually can't ask a person what his goals are directly. Either he'll be unable to articulate them, or he'll be inaccurate or even imperfectly honest. People simply are unprepared to answer such self reflective questions accurately. Therefore, designers and researchers need to carefully reconstruct goals from observed behaviors. So they need to decipher the goals from observed behaviors, answers to other questions, answers to interviews or surveys, non-verbal cues, and clues from the environment, such as the titles of books on shelves, such as how they actually act in their environment. Because again, our environment changes us. So one of the most critical tasks in modeling of personas is identifying goals and expressing them succinctly. So this is the most critical task of identifying personas. Each goal should be expressed as a simple sentence. User goals and cognitive processing. Based on Don Norman, designers should address three different levels of cognitive and emotional processing: visceral, behavioral, and reflective. He provided an articulated structure for modeling user responses to product and brand, and a rational context for many intuitions long held by professional designers. Visceral visceral react to a product visual and other sensory aspects that we can perceive before significant interaction occurs. Visceral processing helps us make rapid decisions about what is good, bad, safe, or dangerous. This is one of the most exciting types of human behavior and one of the most challenging to effectively support with digital products. Malcolm Gladwell explored this level of cognitive processing in his book Blink, Little, Brown and Company, 2005. For an even more in-depth study of intuitive decision-making, see Gary Klein's Sources of Power, MIT Press, 1998, or Harebrained Tortoise Mind by Guy Claxton, Echo, 1999. Behavior is the middle level of processing. These constitute the majority of human activity. So most of human activities are actually the behavior, which we will define this later in terms of our design. It's like a middle part of the behavior, but this is the most important middle part of the goals. Rather, historically, interaction design and usability practice have nearly exclusively addressed this level of cognitive processing. Behavioral processing can enhance or inhibit both lower level visceral reactions and higher level reflective responses. So it can enhance, so this goals could enhance this visceral and reflective. Conversely, both visceral and reflective processing can also enhance and inhibit this. So these are interconnected, these three. Reflective is the least immediate. It involves conscious consideration and reflection on past experiences. Reflective processing can enhance or inhibit behavioral processing but has no direct access to visceral reactions. So it actually does not have direct effect to visceral reactions. So this is the only exception. This level of cognitive processing is accessible only via memory, not through direct interaction or perception. The most interesting aspect of reflective processing as it relates to design is that through reflection we can integrate our experiences with design artifacts into our broader life experience and over time associate meaning and value with artifacts themselves. So it's like our broader long-term goal. Designing for visceral response. For most of us, that means designing visual appearance and motion. Although sound can also play a role, think of the distinctive Mac Power Up chord. People designing devices may design for tactile sensations as well. So for most of us, it means designing for visual appearance and the motion and the sound as well. So it's like on uh, our visual, like rich modulus feedback we've discussed, and the tactile and the sound feedback. People designing devices may design for tactile sensations such as the sense of feel, but designing for visceral response is about designing beautiful things. Battlefield software and radiation therapy systems are just two examples where designing for beauty may not be the proper focus. Visceral design is actually about designing for effect, that is, eliciting the appropriate psychological or emotional response for a particular context rather than for aesthetic alone. So it's about the psychological and emotional response for a specific context rather than just aesthetics alone. Beauty and the feeling of transcendence and pleasures it evokes is really only a small part of the possible affective design palette. So this visceral is about designing for effect, but beauty that elicit the appropriate emotional response for a context rather than the effect that elicit response to initiate a context rather than aesthetics or beauty alone. Uh, or the feelings of transcendence and pleasure it evokes is really only a small part of the possible affective design pali. So the pleasure and the transcendence that we get from beauty is just a one small part of visceral effect. For example, an MP3 player and an online banking system requires very different effects. We can learn a great deal about effect from architecture, the cinema and stage and industrial design. So it's more about the context, which is also how this interaction design works, because we need to consider different business perspective to get a harmonious and integrated solution based on context that we want to improve. It's just not about the visual beauty, because as we will later see, visual beauty without actually helping us achieve our life goals and the behavioral goals is not gonna work. However, in the world of consumer products and services, attractive user interfaces are typically appropriate. So for consumer products and services, an attractive interfaces are appropriate. Interestingly, usability research have demonstrated that users initially judge attractive interfaces to be more usable, and that this belief often persists long after a user has gained sufficient experience with an interface to have direct evidence to the contrary. Perhaps the reason for this is that users, encouraged by perceived ease of use, make a greater effort to learn what may be a challenging interface, and then uh, unwilling to consider their investment ill spent. For the scrupulous designer, this means that when a user interface promises ease of use at the visceral level, or whatever else the visceral promise of an interaction may be, it should then be sure to deliver on that promise at the behavioral level. So if you have a good visceral, you need to make sure to deliver the behavioral level. So designing for behavior, designing for the middle means designing product behaviors that complement the user's own behaviors, implicit assumptions, and mental models. So, designing for this middle part, or the actual user functionality, is complementing their mental models, as well their implicit assumptions, their culture, and their own actual habit behavior. Because as you may know, the behavior or habit of people are hard to change. So, behavioral processing, uniquely among history levels, has direct influence on and is influenced directly by both the other two levels of processing. So it is, as mentioned, it influences the reflective and visceral, and also are affected by both. But this would seem to imply that the day-to-day behavioral aspects of interaction design should be the primary focus of our design efforts, which we will later see that yes, these are the key in designing the interaction. Getting behavior design right, assuming that we also pay adequate attention to the other levels, with visceral and reflective considerations playing a supporting role, provides our greatest opportunity to positively influence how users construct their experience with products. Not following this line of reasoning can cause users' initial impressions to be out of sync with reality. So again, if we just design for visceral effects, for the beauty or affection, the and not really actually helping the customer be more productive, achieve a good life, it will be out of sync with their reality. Also, it is difficult to imagine for reflective meaning in memory without a solid purpose and a set of behavior in place. So that's goes hand in hand. For us to be able to say reflect on something, we must achieve things using our learned habits and mental models in the real world to really makes us more productive, for us to trust that we could reflect on it and we could trust the beauty of the product for the here and now. So the user experience of a product or artifact, therefore, should ideally harmonize elements of visceral design and reflective design with a focus on behavioral design. So designing for reflection, what is clear is that designing for the reflective means designing to build long-term product relationships. So these are concerns about our long-term relationship, like our life goals with the product. Though some products help us really improve our productivity at the moment, some or better designed product help us long-term. So it's easy to see how such products whose value and purpose are, in essence, the uh, aesthetic statements they make could appeal strongly to people's reflective desire for uniqueness or cultural sophistication that perhaps may come from an artistic or stylish self image. So, in reflective design, it's easy to see how such products, whose value and purpose are, in essence, the aesthetic statements they make, could appeal strongly to people's reflective desire for uniqueness or cultural sophistication that perhaps may come from an artistic or self image. So, actually, since we mentioned earlier that for reflective, so it doesn't have an effect to visceral reactions, but sometimes, based on our cultural desire, we actually want this as part of the product, the visceral effect or the beauty, the pleasure or the transcendence. It is more difficult to see how products that also serve a truly useful purpose need to balance the stylistic and the elegant with the functional. Its direct manipulation touch interface merges almost seamlessly with its thick industrial design. So just like an iPhone, uh, it's actually hard to create a product like this that serves our useful, at the same time uh, is very aesthetics or provide us pleasure when using it. So the iPhone's reflective potential is also significant because of the powerful emotional connection people experience with their personal communication, and their music. The iPhone is, of course, also an iPad. So the key is in designing for reflection for long term. You want to integrate all of three. So one of the things that the product that uh, implement these three in balance is iPhone, but it's hard to really like satisfy all these three in harmoniously. It's a winning combination that no single competitor has been able to challenge. Few products become iconic in people's lives in the way that, say, the Sony Walkman or the iPhone has. Clearly, some products stand little chance of ever becoming symbolic in people's lives, like Ethernet routers, for instance, no matter how wonderful they look or how well they behave. However, when the design of a product or service addresses users' goals and motivations, possibly going beyond the product's primary purpose, such as aesthetic and the reflective, yet somehow connected to it via personal or cultural associations, the opportunity to create reflective meaning is greatly enhanced. So this reflection kind of like also related to our cultural associations, and also beauty, because the more culture impact to us, the more it actually help us be it actually help us that become more of our long-term goals. So here, the three types of user goals, Norman does not suggest a method for systematically integrating his model of cognition and affect into the practice of design or user research. So Norman actually does not suggest to integrate those three. So here we will gonna integrate and create a new vocabulary for that. In our practice, we found that the key to doing so lies in properly delineating and modeling three specific types of user goals as part of each persona definition. Life goals, um, who the user wants to be; end goals, behavior, what the user wants to do; experience goals, how the user wants to feel. So that's a visceral, behavior, and reflective. Experience goals. Experience goals are simple, universal, and personal. This makes them difficult for many people to talk about. Experience goals express how someone wants to feel or the quality of his interaction with the product. So it's about the feeling, the pleasure, the transcendence, or the effect the with regards to the context of interaction. In short, the quality of interaction with the product. These goals should focus for a product's visual and oral characteristics about the eye and our ear senses. Its interactive fields such as micro interactions, animated transitions, latency, touch response, and a button snap ratio, quickness, its physical design, and its micro interactions. These goals also offer insights into persona motivations that express themselves at the visceral level. So it also provided insight into the motivation. So again, these are all motivation for the goal, uh, but here are the most common for visceral motivation: feel smart and in control, have fun, feel reassured about security and sensitivity. So feel smart and in control, I'm guilty of that. The reason why I'm reading this is because of that. Feel cool or hip or relax, remain focused and alert. When products, so remain focused and alert, feel cool or hip or relax, those are one of my goals here. That's why I'm reading this. So when products make user feel stupid, or uncomfortable, it's unpleasant, and their effectiveness and enjoyment plummets regardless of uh, their other goals. So if it's doesn't the user does not feel this, they will feel stupid and uncomfortable and unpleasant. So remember, beauty is pleasant, and their effectiveness and enjoyment will plummet regardless of their goals or what they want to do. Their level of resentment also increases if they experience enough of this type of treatment. Users will be primed to subvert the system. Any product that egregiously violates experience goals will ultimately fail, regardless of how well it purports to achieve other goals. So again, and later, the previous video, the design principles we discussed in the previous videos are actually all are designed to help the visual and the ear senses of our customer and make things as um, comfortable and pleasurable and beautiful, while at the same time achieving our behavior goals or motivation. Interaction, visual, and industrial designers must translate persona experience goals into form, behavior, motion, and auditory elements that communicate the proper feel, affect, emotion, and tone that harmoniously and integrately balance all the requirements to achieve this beauty to the customer. Visual language studies as well as mood or inspiration boards, which attempts to establish visual themes. So visual language studies as well as mood or inspiration boards, which attempt to establish visual themes based on persona as attitudes and behaviors, are a useful tool for designing persona tonal expectations. So the way for us to get this feel right is this persona attitudes and behavior as well, using mood or inspiration boards, visual language studies, which we've discussed in the previous videos on how actually people it's the science of how people perceive things. And goals, represent the user's motivation for performing the task associated with using a specific product. So it's like the actual goal or function. When you pick up a cell phone or open a document with a word processor, you likely have an outcome in mind. A product or service can help accomplish such goals directly or indirectly. So you may think that the product could only help you achieve your goals directly, but also indirectly. For example, they may remove some exercise that will help you achieve your goals faster. These goals are the focus of a product's interaction design. So later, we will discuss how focusing on this also help us focus on that visceral effect. But these are the main focus of interaction design on how we can better achieve the customer's goals with less tasks as possible. And information architecture and the functional aspects of industrial design, because behavioral processing influence both visceral and reflective responses. So this, when done properly, could help the customer change their goals. Maybe they change their career because they found that Microsoft provides a great way to help them achieve their goals in visceral and behavioral effect. And goals should be among the most significant factors in determining the overall product experience. So it's the most important in determining overall product experience, and goals must be met for users to think that a product is worth their time and money. So this is actually the question of how did you actually help the customer become productive in terms of their time and money. Here are some examples of end goals. Be aware of problems before they become critical. Stay connected with friends and family. Clear my to-do list by 5 p.m. every day. Find music that I love. Get the best deal. So these are actually what you will usually find from a design research. So these are the categories or things that the customer want to achieve. End goals as the foundation for a product's behavior, task, look, and feel. So this will be the context of the design that you will improve. This will determine how you will provide the contextual feeling in visceral level, and how you will remove the task, unnecessary task, to achieve it. Context or the day in the life scenarios and cognitive walkthroughs, which we've discussed in the previous book, are effective tools for exploring user goals and mental models, which in turn facilitate appropriate behavioral design. So this cognitive walkthrough, in essence, are still trying to find the customer's habits or mental model. As we discuss, you may think that in visceral level, where sorry, I found this here, the here. So as you can see, the designing for behavior is the same for um, designing for end goals, because for behavior we're looking at usage pattern, the behavior, the habits, and the mental models. So here, end goals as the foundation for a product's behavior, task, look, and feel. Context or day-to-day or cognitive walkthrough on how they actually do that every day, and based on their mental models, are actually useful here, which in turn facilitate appropriate behavioral design. Life goals. Um, Life goals represent the user's personal aspirations that typically go beyond the context of the product being designed. So it represent the user's goals, user's personal aspiration that typically go beyond the context of the product being designed. These goals represent deep drives and motivations that help explain why the user is trying to accomplish the end goals he seeks to accomplish. So this is where we actually find the reflective or the why, or the real motivation or the goals that we've tried to find in the user research, which the user is imperfectly honest about. Life goals describe a person's long-term desires, motivations, and self-image attributes. Motivation and self-image attributes, which causes the persona to connect with the product. These goals are the focus of a product's overall design, strategy, and branding. which we've discussed in the previous video. Like the one attribute that determine the tone of the company, live the good life, succeed in my ambitions. So it's like a big goal. It's not as useful as a more specific, which is the end goal. Be a connoisseur of, be attractive, popular, and respected by my peers. So that's also in a way my goal here. The reason why I'm recording this, because I want to be this efficient long-term. Interaction designers must translate life goals into high-level system capabilities. So you want to systemize all are in harmony in achieving this. Mood boards and context scenarios can be helpful in exploring different aspects of product concepts. So the reason why you interview different part or stakeholders and the users is because so that in these mood boards and context scenario, it will help you explore different aspects so that you have more holistic view of what the customers or you are better equipped to um, satisfy the customers' goals. And broad ethnographic research and cultural modeling are critical for discovering reflective or life goals, users' behavior patterns, and deeper motivations. So these are like the deeper motivations. It's like a lifestyle design of people. So a product that the user discovers will take him closer to his life goals. So a product that the user discovers will take him closer to his life goals, not just his end goals. So those end goals are connected, will win him over more decisively than any marketing campaign. So this combination of end goals and life goals will win or sell the customer than any other sales or marketing campaign. Addressing users' life goals makes the difference, assuming that other goals also met between a satisfied user and a fanatically loyal user. So this is actually how you create that great product that people actually use every day. User goals and user motivations. Understanding personas is more about understanding motivations and goals than it is about understanding specific tasks or demographics. So those two goes hand in hand. Linking persona goals with Norman's model top-level user motivation include the following: experience goals, which are related to visceral processing, how the user wants to feel, and goals, which are related to behavior, what the user wants to do. Life goals, which are related to reflection, who the user wants to be. Using personas, goals, and scenarios as you learn in upcoming chapters provide the key to unlocking the power of visceral, behavioral, and reflective design. So this persona that we will gonna learn how to use or how to create later are the key in achieving and satisfying these three um, needs. Personas, goals, and scenarios to be exact, and bringing this together into a harmonious whole. While some of our best designers seem to understand and act on these aspects of design almost intuitively, consciously designing for all levels of human cognition and emotion offers tremendous potential for creating more satisfying and effective user experiences. Non-user goals, customer goals, Business goals and technical goals are all non-user goals, but the user goals still dictate the design direction. Customer goals, consumer customers often are parents, relatives, or friends who often have concerns about the safety and happiness of the people for whom they are purchasing the product. Enterprise customers typically are IT managers or procurement specialists, and they often have concerns about security, ease of maintenance, ease of customization, and price. Customer personas also may have their own life experience and especially end goals in relation to the product if they used it in any capacity. So if they are using it, they actually have life experience and end goals. But as we've discussed, these are really the user of the product. Business and organization goals. It's important to identify the business goals of the organization, commissioning the design and developing and selling, or otherwise distributing the product early in the design process. Clearly, these organizations are hoping to accomplish something with the product, which is why they are willing to spend money and effort on design and development. Namely, increase profit, increase market share, retain customers, defeat the competition, use resources more efficiently, offer more products or services, keep its IP secure. You may find yourself designing on behalf of an organization that is not necessarily a business, such as museum, non-profit, or school, although many such organizations are run as business these days. These organizations also have goals that must be considered, such as the following: educate the public, raise enough money to cover overhead. Technical goals. Many of these goals is the task of software creation, maintenance, scalability, and extensibility, which are developers' goals. Unfortunately, meeting these goals often comes at the expense of user goals. It is important to stress early in the education process that these goals must ultimately serve user and business goals. Technical goals include the following: run in a variety of browsers, safeguard data integrity, increase application execution efficiency. So variety of safeguard data integrity, security, more of security, increase application execution efficiency, like fast loading, and then long-term viability of code, use a particular development language or library, maintain consistency across platforms. So consistency and security, as well as the language learning. Technical goals are not terribly meaningful to a product success unless they are derived from the need to meet other, more human-oriented goals. It might be a software company's task to use a new technology, but it is really the user's goals for them to do so. In most cases, users don't care if their job is accomplished with hierarchical database, relational database, object-oriented database, flat file systems, or black magic. What we care about is getting our job done swiftly, effectively, and with modicum of ease and dignity. So successful products meet user goal first. Good design has meaning only for someone who uses a product for a particular purpose. So, or meeting, namely meeting end goals, life goals, and experience goals. You cannot have purposes without people. The most important purposes or goals to consider when designing a product are the goals of the individuals who actually use the product. So the most important goals out of this customer, business, developer are the user. The user's most important goal is always to retain her human dignity and not feel stupid. So we can reliably say that we make the users feel stupid if we let her make big mistakes, keep her from getting an adequate amount of work done, or inhibit her in being more productive. thus not actually helping us provide the customer value or bore her. Design principle: don't make the user feel stupid. The essence of good interaction design is devising interactions that achieve goals of the manufacturer or service provider and its partner while supporting user goals. So this is the essence of interaction design: managing or balancing business goals, developer, stakeholders, and user goals. Constructing personas. Personas are derived from behavioral patterns observed during interviews with observations of a product's users and potential users and sometimes customers. So these personas are derived from those three: customers, potential users, and the actual users. And the interviews and observation from those, it could be a survey, literature, and the actual interaction with those. Gaps in this data are filled by supplemental research and data provided by SMEs, stakeholders, quantitative research, and other available literature. Our goal in constructing a set of persona is to represent the diversity of frustrations with current products or systems, observe motivations, uh, behavior, behaviors, attitudes, aptitudes, constraints, mental models, work or activity flows, and environments. So we're trying to represent the diversity of this motivation and behavior pattern for us to really determine who are the biggest customers. So as you can see, we're trying to find the diversity of frustrations with current products, observe motivations. So when we talk about the frustration, the task that do not really help them achieve their goals or help them viscerally or experience goals or help enhance experience and reflective goals. So we're really trying to redesign to remove the excise. Observe motivations, the diversity of their motivation on why are they doing what they're doing based on their overall life goals, and then trying to harmonize all of that: behaviors, attitudes, aptitudes, constraints, mental models, their cultures, work or activity flows or workflow, productivity flow, their software tools, etc., and environments where they use the product. As you can see, it's pretty diverse and um, wool compared to just simple um, technique that most designer use. So this help experienced designer to stay focused on actual behavior patterns, especially in consumer domains. So it helps this persona help focus and find the most common behavior and not be bugged by any opinionated and not triangulated ideas about why the customer actually are paying for our product. So figure 3.5 shows the principal steps. So it's kind of like, instead of just user experience goal, kind of like include the system activity or system-based thinking that we've discussed in the previous chapter. So yeah, you have this different types of that that allows you to balance it harmoniously to achieve your long-term business goals. So these sophisticated tools actually help us combat and make things or these micro interactions and little details or otherwise confusing data on why people actually do and use our product uh, more manageable. So this help experienced designer to stay focused on actual behavior patterns, especially in consumer domains. Show the principle in this step. So here, group interview subjects by role. Identify behavioral variables. So map interview subjects to behavioral variables. Identify significant behavior patterns. Synthesize characteristics and define goals. Check for redundancy and completeness. Designate persona types. Expand description of attributes and behavior. So you can see it's pretty complicated, but we will reap the benefits of this, of creating this persona later in the design process. Group interview subjects by role. For enterprise applications, roles are easy to delineate because they usually map to job roles or descriptions. Consumer products have more subtle role divisions, including family roles, attitudes or approaches to relevant activities, interests, aptitudes regarding lifestyle choices, and then their life stages as well. So these are more broad for consumer roles. That's why in interviews, you actually double the interview. The more diverse the lifestyle choices and the lifestyle stages. But here you commonly do that using family roles, attitudes, approaches to interests and aptitudes regarding lifestyle choices. But for enterprise, it's more straightforward because you just need to map these roles to their job roles. Step 2. Identify behavioral variables. List the distinct aspects of observed behavior for each role as a set of behavioral variables. So again, this is actually the point where we actually creating the persona from the research we've gathered from the previous video. So for each role, we need to identify the distinct behavioral variables. Demographic variables such as age or geographic location may sometimes seems to affect behavior. So sometimes this is where we actually find the correlation between this demographic and geographic location to the behavior. But be wary of focusing on demographics because behavioral variables will be far more useful in developing effective user archetypes. So, in developing persona, the behavioral variables that got distinctly from these roles are more useful than these demographics. Although the number of variables will differ from project to project, it's difficult to find 15 to 30 variables per role. So again, 15 to 30 per role. So this is actually how you make things seem that is complicated earlier to now more manageable. So just remember that 50 to 30 behavior variables is what you get each role. These variables may be similar to those you identified as part of your persona hypothesis, because again, in persona hypothesis is how we accept or reject whatever the hypothesis we created. So here we could get from it, but it's still important to go through the step or the step 2 of persona creation. Compare behaviors identified in the data to the assumptions made in the persona hypothesis. Were the possible roles that you identified truly distinct? So you need to confirm that in your persona hypothesis is that behavior truly distinct to that role, where the behavior variables, see chapter 2, you identified valid, where the additional unanticipated ones or ones you anticipated that weren't supported by data. So generally, we see the most important distinction between behavior patterns emerge by focusing the following types of variables. So this is actually how we find the distinction of behavior activities. So this is how we make things uh, clear or more manageable. What the user does, frequency and volume. So the frequency, the number of times the user does the activity. Attitudes, how the user thinks about the product domain. And technology, aptitudes, what education and training the user has, ability to learn. Motivations, why the user is engaged in the product domain. Skills, user abilities related to the product domain and technology. So as you can see, these are all contextual compared to just demographics, and also we it is far more clear in creating personas because we started from the user roles and the motivation with understanding of how do actually people do, and also we have this 15 to 30 variables which makes it explicit instead of just implicit compared to demographics. So list the complete set of behavioral variables observed. If your data is at variance with your assumptions in persona hypothesis, you need to add, subtract, or modify the roles and behaviors you anticipated. So this is how the balance of the researcher will comes, because you need to add, subtract, or modify based on the assumptions you get from user research. So this is where you get a clearer and clearer picture of the persona. If the variance is significant enough, you may consider additional interviews to cover any gaps in the behavioral ranges you discovered. So just like in the modern agile, once you have this theory, you still iterate it for a month and then trying to learn from the research. Step 3, map the interview subjects to behavioral variables. So this is where actually we create this variable, the things that we see from the data that is more important to the user in 1 to 2 words. So that is the subject, the interview subjects to behavioral variables. So based on the variables we got, 15 to 30 variables per role, in which are they related to our interview subject. So remember, interview subject was determined in the previous video. So the next step is to map each interview against each variable. Some of these variables will represent a continuous range of behavior, such as confidence in using technology for expert users. Other will represent multiple discrete choices, such as using a digital camera versus using a film camera. So those are more context choices rather than the characteristics or the skill of the people. So mapping the interview to a precise point in the range isn't as critical as identifying the placement of interviewees in relation to each other. So the roles that we've identified and how they are have the same distinct variables based on the subject is not and how they are close to each other, like in this graph, are actually is not is more important than they are related to the subject, as we will see, because this subject is not as important as grouping this behavior or user. So in other words, it doesn't matter if an interview falls at precisely 55, 45 or 50% on the scale. So those distinct variables and how they relate to subject is not as important, but it's just important that we describe those um, variables, there's little variables for us to identify which really is connected, which user are in the same group. So the act of defining that help us in this. So there's often no good way to measure this precisely. You must rely on your gut feeling based on your observations of the subject. So again, we're not looking for that quantitative data, but with our gut feeling, because that's the reason why we're getting this qualitative data. So the desired outcomes of this step is to accurately represent how multiple subject cluster with respect to each significant variable. So based on the significant 1 to 2 or like few variables that really important to us, um, and how multiple subjects were clustered with respect to that, and the role that is included into that. As you can see, user 1 and 4 could be in necessity only and price oriented. So the role could be in these multiple subjects. That's another characteristics of this. So here, mapping the interview subjects to behavioral variables. This example is from an online store. Interview subjects are maps across each behavioral axis. Precision of the absolute position of an individual subject on an axis is less important than its relative position to other subjects. So the relative position on other So the precision here is not important, but the relative position to other subjects, such as here focus on entertainment, here necessity only, service oriented, price oriented. So that's how you can find a more holistic view on what this customer, what is the motivation that's driving this behavior. Step 4, identify behavior patterns. A set of so we tried to find 15 to 30 variables, behavior variables per role. Now we're gonna try to identify the patterns between those behavior based on subjects. So a set of subjects will cluster in 6 to 8 different variables, such as necessity only, will likely represent a significant behavior pattern. So 6 to 8 variables in one subject will indicate a pattern. So in this subject, necessity only, if it has like 6 to 8 variables from our user roles, it means that there is a pattern that will form the basis of a persona. You just need to look for clusters of subjects that occur across multiple ranges or variables. So some specialized roles may exhibit only one significant pattern, but typically you will find 2 or even 3 such patterns in each roles, whether it's family role or the employees roles in the organization. For a pattern to be valid, there must be a logical or causative connection between the clustered behaviors. So that's the reason why you need the 6 to 8 behavior patterns, because we are trying to prove here the validity of this pattern to our stakeholders, not just a spurious correlation. For example, there is a clearly logical connection if data shows that people who regularly purchase CDs also like to download MP3 files. But there's probably no logical connection if the data shows that interviewees who frequently purchase CDs online are also vegetarians. So there's no logic if your data shows that interviewees who frequently purchase CDs online are also vegetarians. Step 5, synthesize characteristics and define goals. So since we already have the pattern, we will find the characteristics now, and then we will define the goals. We derive a persona's goals and other attributes from their behavioral patterns. It's interrelated. We find the user role, which is not the persona. Now we are getting the persona, goals, and other attributes from their behaviors. So these behaviors are synthesized from what was observed and identified in the research process as representing meaningful typical use of the product over a period of time. So these are the behaviors that provide a meaningful persona goals and other attributes with a typical use of the product over a period of time. Now, aside from behavior pattern of that user, we actually have the time based on time, because those different users also use the product in different time limits and different frequency. We call this a day in the life, but the period of time really depends on the product or service being used, exactly what the persona does with it. So executive personas, for example, often have a particular behaviors associated with quarterly and yearly earnings reports. So some of the user are actually an executive. So that's why the behavior are mapped to quarterly and yearly earnings reports. Consumers often have behaviors particular to their culture's holidays that should be investigated. So for consumers, regular consumers, sometimes their culture holidays are most often that need things that is related in identifying these goals, synthesizing characteristics and goals in a specified time, such as the cultural holiday. So at this point, brief bullet points describing the behaviors characteristics are sufficient. Stick to observe behaviors as much as possible. Now since we already got the truer, clearer and picture, we need to stick on that behavior pattern. But here we just need to get a brief bullet points describing the behaviors characteristics based on that behavior pattern. A description or two that sharpens the personalities of your persona can help bring them to life. So 1 to 2 sentence that describe those persona that has like 6 to 8 like variables, right? Pattern per user role that helps them come to life, such as the executive or that person only got that from holiday. However, too much fictional biography, especially if includes quirky details, is a distraction and makes your persona distracting. Remember that you are creating a design tool, not a character sketch for a novel. Only concrete data can support the design and business decisions your team will ultimately make. Just a moment, guys. Okay, guys, so let's continue. However, too much fictional biography, especially if it includes quirky details, is a distraction and makes your persona distracting. Remember that you are creating a design tool, not a character sketch for a novel. You can at this time add some demographic information such as age, geographic location, relative income if appropriate, and job title. So since you have this 1 to 2 uh, description of that persona based on that pattern, since this demographic do not affect that research of behavior pattern, you can now add some of this important strictly age, location, relative income if appropriate, and job title. So those could be added. Uh, this information primarily helps you visualize the persona better as you assemble the behavioral details. From this point on, you should refer to the persona by his or her name. For each significant behavior pattern you identify, you must synthesize details from your data. These details should include the following at a minimum: the behavior themselves, activities, and motivations behind them. So for each significant behavior pattern you identify, you must synthesize details from your data. So you need to again find the the synthesize the characteristics and define the goals. So this is aside from getting those information or the demographics and then the behavioral pattern with respect to time. These details should include the following at a minimum. So the behavior themselves or the pattern, activities, and motivations behind them based on the user or the goals we've discussed earlier, the use or the environment, and then of course there's a time here which we've discussed, frustrations and pain points related to the behavior using current solution. Of course, there's an exercise task there that could be removed Demographics associated with the behavior, which we just recently added. Skills, experience, or abilities relating to the behavior. So this could be already included if we are designing for an enterprise, because they have roles, they have experience, they have abilities, right? But the age are different. So those could be the variables. Attitudes and emotions associated with the behavior, relevant interactions with other people, product or services. So this is like the second order effect, which we're gonna discuss further later. Alternate or competing ways of doing the same thing, especially analog techniques. So like the modifier that they could be used uh, based on that usage pattern. So they could use like um, accelerators to do the same goals, such as control C and control V. Now we're gonna define goals based on that. Once we get these characteristics and then behavior patterns with respect to time and demographics, and also defining the persona using 1 to 2 statements, we could now define the goals. So goals are best derived by analyzing the behavior patterns comprising each of that persona we created, by identifying the logical connections between each clusters uh, of interviewees' behaviors. You can begin to infer the goals that led to those behaviors. So we're so these goals are actually derived from behavior patterns, but it also derived from the goals concept we've discussed earlier. So we will now gonna identify the logical connections between each clusters of interviewees' behaviors. So based on the subject that we have and behavior pattern, we can begin to infer goals that led to those behaviors. So we will gonna ask if it's like an experience goals, user goals, end goals, and life goals. So we can see that usually those are end goals. They're trying to find an end goal. So you can infer goals both by observing actions, what subjects in each persona cluster are trying to accomplish, and why. Observing that interview, and by analyzing subject responses to goal-oriented interview questions, like the questions we've asked in the previous video. To be effective as a design tools, goals must always relate directly in some way to the product being designed. So it should be related to the product design, whether it's an end goal or the specific interface that we're trying to design or redesign. Typically, the majority of useful goals for a persona are end goals. So what are the persona are trying to be productive with? You can expect most persona to have 3 to 5 end goals associated with them. So our product are actually usually trying to achieve 3 to 5 functional tasks or things that makes our persona productive. Life goals are most useful for personas of consumer-oriented products, but they can also make sense for enterprise persona in transient job roles. So for transient job roles in that enterprise, a life goals could be useful, but 0 or 1 life goal is appropriate for most personas, whether it's consumer or enterprise. So it's not as many as end goals. General experience goals, as don't feel stupid and don't waste time, can be taken as implicit for almost any persona. So could not, should not, I mean, could be left unsaid, because it's really like different for different personas. Could be hard to really quantify, and it's not really useful as end goals, because remember, an end goal is also related here, but it's not the main thing or the context. The customer are just trying to achieve some goal with as less exercise as possible. So I recommend like going back to the exercise chapter. Occasionally, a specific domain may dictate the need for more specific experience goals. 0 to 2 experience goals is appropriate for most personas. So it's more than a life goal. So that's occasionally for I mean specific the domain may dictate 2. So you either have more of this or not. Personas and relationships. It sometimes makes sense for a product set of personas to be part of the same family or team within an organization. So they could be in the same team, but they are different personas. They can also have interpersonal or social relationships with each other. So those persona, both of our persona, though it's different persona, could have a relationship in the same family, in the same organization. When considering whether it makes sense for a persona to have a business or social relationships, think about these 2 points. Whether you observe any behavioral variations in your interview subjects related to variations in company size, industry, or family or social dynamic. Because again, we don't want to make as many relationships as possible. We want to lessen the relationship for us to really have the causative relation. In this case, you'll want to make sure that your persona set represents this diversity by being situated in at least a couple of different businesses or social settings. So if this is the case, you want to make sure that the persona set represents this diversity by having a couple of different businesses or social settings in the environment of the persona you create, if there's really this relationship exists. If it is critical to illustrate workflow or social interactions between co-workers or members of a family or social group. So that is where you think about this. So as you can see, it gets more and more complex as we add this relationship. You run the risk of expressing a significant goal that doesn't belong with a pre-established relationship. So if you does this the wrong way, you run the risk of representing a goal with pre-established that doesn't belong with the pre-established relationship. So if you like just create this relationship that does not actually relate to their goal, you will run the risk of this. So if you create a personas that work for the same company or that have social relationship with each other, a single social relationship between your set of personas is easier to define than several different unrelated social relationships with your persona between individual persona and minor players outside the persona set. However, it can be much better to put the initial effort into developing diverse persona with those relationship than to risk the temptation of bending more diverse scenario to fit a single social dynamic. So you don't want this relationship as possible, but you don't also want to leave it blank if there is really that relationship. Step 6. Check for completeness and redundancy. In this, we've have a better picture, the persona starting to form its true image. You should check your mappings and persona's characteristics and goals to see if any important gaps need filling. This again may point to the need to perform additional research to find particular behaviors that are missing from your behavioral axis. You might also want to check your notes to see if you need to add any particular political personas to satisfy stakeholder assumptions or requests. So you may need to check your goals based on this persona uh, to really achieve these goals, because sometimes some stakeholders has this political you need to like navigate it politically for them to persuade to really make the product reality that best serve this persona. So we've occasionally had to add personas with identical goals but different locales to satisfy branches of client organizations on those locales, that their constituents' voices were heard and are represented in the design. If you find that two personas seem to vary only by demographics, you may choose to eliminate one of the redundant personas or tweak your persona's characteristic to make them more distinct personas. So you may want to. Each persona should vary from all others in at least one significant behavior. So the behavior is one that actually differentiate this persona. The distinct behavior variables we got from user roles and the behavior patterns. So this behavior pattern should be distinct in each persona. You need to make sure of that if you're gonna try to combine this one person a persona that has different locales but has the same behavior. By making sure that your persona is complete and that each persona is meaningfully distinct, you ensure that your persona sufficiently represent the diversity of behaviors and needs in the real world. This designate persona types. Design requires a target, the audience upon whom the design is focused. So the more specific the target, the better. Trying to create a design solution that simultaneously serves the need of even 3 or 4 personas can be an overwhelming task. So we need to only provide or divide this persona into primary, secondary. So as we will later see, we will gonna make sure that we will gonna serve this primary while at the same time serving all of this persona. It shouldn't be like win-less situation. We want to find a win-win, just as we find a win-win situation to achieve the business, stakeholders, and different goals. So what we must do then is to prioritize our persona to determine which should be the primary design target. The goal is to find a single persona from the set whose needs and goals can be completely and happily satisfied by a single interface without disenfranchising any one of the other personas. Primary persona. So the goal is to find a single persona from the set whose needs and goals can be completely and happily satisfied by a single interface without disenfranchising other persona. So that means that without like compromising the secondary and other persona. Primary persona. A product can have only one primary persona per interface. So each interface we're trying to design and redesign can only have one of that, because the primary persona is the target of the design. And also, if you have this more than one, it's kind of hard to prove if they are the really if there's really a causative relation. So for example, a healthcare information system might have a separate clinical and financial interfaces, each targeted at a different persona. So this interface for financial and health have a different target persona. It should be noted that we use the term interface in an abstract sense here. In some cases, two separate interface might be two separate applications that act on the same data. So those interfaces, like for financial and medical, Those could be two applications, but they act on the same data. So I recommend you going back on the previous book about interfaces. In other cases, the two interface might simply be two different sets of functionality served to different users based on their role or customization. So sometimes it's just the same application with the same functionality. It's just served to two different users. So in other cases, um, the two interfaces might simply be two different sets of functionality served to two different users based on their role or customization. So in other cases, the two interfaces, so we just repeat that. However, if the primary persona is the target, all other personas will not at least be dissatisfied. So design principle, focus the design for each interface on a single primary persona. So for each that interface of like financial and health, you need to focus on just the primary persona or the primary user of that interface. Of course, other could use that, but there is a primary users of that interface. Choosing the primary persona is a process of elimination. You must test each persona by comparing its goals against goals of the others. So their end goals, are they do they have 3 to 5 functions that they do, and based on the step or the persona creation that we've created, the 3 to 5 goals with respect to time, how often or the frequency they use the product. If no clear primary persona is evident, it could mean one of two things. Either the product needs multiple interfaces that serve different primary persona, each with a suitable primary persona, which is often the case for enterprise and technical products, or the product is trying to accomplish too much. If a consumer product has multiple primary personas, its scope may be too broad. Avoid the trap of simply selecting the persona who maps to the largest market segment. The OXO Good Grips line of product was originally designed to be easy to use for people with arthritis. It turns out that satisfying this user with the most constraints and a tiny portion of the total market satisfy the bulk of customers greatly. The largest segment may not be your primary or most leveraged persona. Once again, we're just trying to design those little context or design those little interface that will help the primary persona. We're not trying to design the entire market segment, which could the primary persona or this persona came from, but it's not the market, right? Secondary persona. A secondary persona is most dissatisfied with the primary primary persona's interface. We do not always have a secondary persona. More than 3 or 4 secondary personas can be assigned that the proposed product scope may be too large and unfocused. As you work through solutions, your approach should be to first design for the primary and then to adjust the design to accommodate the secondary. Supplemental personas, their needs are completely represented by a combination of primary and secondary personas and are completely satisfied by the solution we devise for one of our primaries. So these needs, once you satisfy the primary and secondary, are completely satisfied by the solution as well, because they are just a supplemental personas we devised for one of our primaries. Any number of supplemental personas can be associated, often political personas, the ones added to the cast to address stakeholder assumptions, become supplemental persona. So the one that we need to address politically to approve our design, to achieve the most persona, and then to achieve their goals, remove the excise, and then achieve them, let them be more productive so we can charge more. Customer personas. Customer persona address the needs of customers, not end users, as discussed earlier. Typically, customer personas are treated like secondary personas. However, in some enterprise environments, some customer personas may be the primary personas for their own administrative interface. Serve personas, they are not users of the product, but they are directly affected by the use of the product. So it's kind of like the second order effect of the personal relationship that we've discussed in the step 6 earlier. A patient being treated by a radiation therapy machine is not a user of the machine interface, but she's much very served by a good interface. Served personas provide a way to track second-order social and physical ramification of products. These are treated like secondary personas. Negative personas. Negative personas, also sometimes called anti-personas, are used to communicate to stakeholders and product team members that the product is not being built to serve specific type of users. So it's kind of like a communication tool. Like served personas, they aren't the users of the product. Their use is purely rhetorical to help communicate to other members of the team that personas should definitely not be the product's design target. Good candidates for negative personas are often technology savvy early adopter personas for consumer products, criminals, less harmful pranksters and trolls, and IT specialists for business user enterprise products. So you can see the criminal and the expert are goes hand in hand, because as the more expert you are, the more you can also do bad things. So step 8, expand the description of attributes and behaviors. Your list of bullet point characteristics and goals arrive in step 5. Points to the essence of complex behaviors, but leaves much implied. So since we find the characteristics of that behavior patterns, it does not tell us a lot about the attributes and behaviors. So a lot of questions are generated there. Third person narrative is far more powerful at conveying the persona's attitudes, needs, and problems to other team members. So a third person narrative is far more powerful at conveying persona's attitude, needs, and problems to other team members. It also deepens the designer's author's connection to and empathy for the persona and their motivations. The persona narrative. So here's a third person narrative. A typical persona description should be a synthesis of the most important details observed during research relevant to this persona. Ideally, the majority of your user research findings should be contained in your persona description. So all the research findings should be contained in the persona description. But this persona narrative is just a synthesis of the most important. But you want to compile those most important in the description. This will be the manner in which your research directly informed design, as you will see in the upcoming chapter. So this will be the basis of the all the design process. This narrative should be no longer than 1 or 2 pages of prose or PowerPoint slides. A paragraph for every 1 or 2 bullet points from the characteristics in step 5. So paragraphs for one of the those characteristics, or 2 bullet points for paragraph for every one of the persona, or 2 bullet points. And also this should be no longer than 1 or 2 pages per of power slide per persona. This persona narrative does not need to contain every observed detail. Ideally, the designer also performed the research, and most people outside the design team do not require more details than this, since the designer are the one who conducted research. So, the best narrative quickly introduced the persona in terms of his job or lifestyle. So again, the lifestyle is the key in the job, because it provides the lifestyle, design. It briefly sketches a day in his life, including peeves, concerns, interests that have bearing on the product. So it sketches a day in his life in a job or lifestyle, including peeves, what the exercise on the task, the concerns, the interest, or the end goals, the visceral or experience goals that have bearing on the design interface. Detail should be an expansion of your list of characteristics. The characteristics should have an additional data derived from your observations and interviews. So the details for this persona life should be an expansion of the characteristics you find from that CEO, with respect to time and their behavior patterns. And then an additional data derived from your observation and interviews you got from the previous video. The narrative should express what the persona is looking for in the product by way of a conclusion. So it should express in 1 or 2 simple sentences what the persona is looking for to achieve, to be more productive with your product. So be careful about the amount of detail in your descriptions. The detail should not exceed the depth of your research. So it should not provide misleading or data that you didn't really get from your research. In scientific disciplines, if you record a measurement of 35.421 meters, this implies that your measurement are accurate to 0.01 meters. A detailed persona description implies a similar level of observation in your research. Also, be sure not to introduce hints about design solutions into the persona description. So you should not provide a solution here based on this persona, this primary persona. Also, you should have this 3.001 accuracy on the research so as not to provide a inaccurate conclusion. In summary, do include summarizing description of all significant behavior patterns in your narrative. The behavior pattern we got. Do not include excessive fictional description. Include just enough detail to cover basic demographics and to weave the behavior patterns into a story. So this behavior pattern should be in a story, and also just the enough demographics such as the location, job title, etc., or the income if it's necessary. Do not add levels of detail to your behavioral descriptions that you did not observe. Do not introduce solutions into your persona narrative. Rather, highlight pain points, or the excise. Finally, never list ranges or averages as detail for personas. Personas are individuals and would never have 1.5 kids making 35 to 45,000 per year. Those are values for market segments. If these details are important to your persona, pick specifics. The persona photo. So when you start developing your narrative, choose photographs for your personas. Photographs make them feel more real as you create the narrative and engage other on the team when you are finished. You should take great care in choosing a photograph. The best photos capture demographic information, hint at the environment. A persona for a nurse should be wearing a nurse uniform and be in a clinical settings, perhaps with a patient. The frequency, hint of the frequency, and capture the persona's general attitude. A photo for a clerk overwhelmed by paper might look hurried. So here are some other things to watch for with personas photos. Do not use photos with unusual camera angles or distortions. This is distracting and makes the persona look like caricature. So unusual camera angles or distortion. So because it's new, if it's unusual, do not use photos with exaggerated expressions. This will also look like a caricature. Do not use photos in which people are obviously posed and smiling for the camera. Do use photos where the subjects look like average people rather than models. Do use photos in which the subjects is engaged in an appropriate activity against a realistic background. Try to keep photos across persona sets similar in style and crop. So, in the realistic environment as well and the appropriate activity. We also found it sometimes useful to create photographic collage for each persona to convey more emotional and experiential forces that drive the persona. Photographic collage for each persona to convey more emotional and experience forces that drive the persona. So, sometimes it's useful. Numerous small images juxtaposed have the potential to convey things that are difficult to describe in words. So, this little tabness. There are also times we find it useful to create models of the personas environments, for example, in the form of a floor plan. Again, this helps make this environmental consideration more tangible. So here, collage such as this combined with carefully written narratives are an effective way to convey emotional and experiential aspects of persona. Emotional and experiential. So, here you're triggering the experiential visceral effect. When creating such communication aids, it's important to remember that personas are design and decision-making tools, not an end in themselves. While power can come from creating a holistic image of a persona, too much embellishment and theater theater can make persona seems like a floppy waste of time. This can ultimately reduce their usefulness as user models. Personas in practice. Over the last decades, since the persona creation process was described in the second edition of this book, questions have risen about the proper use of persona. This section endeavors to answer some of the criticism leveled at persona-based design methods. Misconceptions about persona. Designers make up personas. Personas' goals are constructed from inference and deductions made by designer when interpreting this data. These narrative constructs are communication aids only. They do not affect the real behavioral data used to characterize the personas. So it's only communication aids, but it's still real, coming from behavioral patterns from diverse set of users and upon which design decisions will ultimately made. Unfortunately, not everyone claiming to use personas follow the data gathering process we described in the previous chapter. If you are involved with the product team, design team, or client who claims to be using personas, ask them how their personas were constructed, what user data was gathered, and how it was analyzed to create them. Sometimes demographic user profiles may be presented as personas with little more than a bit of narrative window dressing. So the demographic or market segments are sometimes used by people to cover up the persona. An immediate yellow flag is a persona that does not have any goals associated with it. While demographic information alone may help teams communicate a little about the makeup of their user base, that information is sufficient to build personas that will be out of use in generating detailed design concepts. So while this demographic helps with the makeup of their user base, the information is insufficient and only leads to more questions than answers. So that information is insufficient to build personas that will be used in generating detailed design concepts. Personas aren't as useful as involving real people. Over the years, some practitioners have questions whether bringing actual users with real photos, real demographics, and real particular behaviors into the design process wouldn't be more effective and true. This approach, known as participatory design, seemed to solve some problems from a philosophical and political standpoint. In reality, however, it actually creates some significant problems for the conceptualization of the design. Clustering and analyzing the behavior of many people serves as an essential purpose. It allows the designer to separate critical behaviors and needs that are common across a broad set of users from idiosyncratic behaviors that is idiosyncratically tailored to that interface that are particular to a given user. Focusing on individual users rather than aggregated sets of user behaviors also make it more likely that you may miss key behaviors because you're not using the diverse set of users with a diverse set of behavior patterns that your individual user with his idiosyncratic behavior just doesn't happen to do or does differently than most users. Since you also have this different primary, secondary, and different type of persona, it makes sense to use this type of data instead of just one true or real picture of the users. You need to convince your team that those persona are from actual research. If that doesn't work, you'll need to convince them that any individual user feedback has to be synthesized against broader patterns in research or aggregated with other users providing feedback in the same session. Peoples don't do tasks, especially with consumer products and social systems. It is fair to say that people rarely think in terms of tasks. Few people hop on Facebook, turn on a television, or visit a news site to accomplish a particular thing that they have in mind. It can be more to just see what's happening and respond. Some designers have subsequently advocated that the task-based approach will not serve these domains and argue to get rid of personas and design just from inspiration. While it might be correct to say that not all users think in terms of tasks, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Tasks aren't the beating heart of personas. Goals are, and be caught up on what's happening is a perfectly reasonable goal. So those are goals, even if you're just caught up in what's happening. Personas are traceable. While every major persona trait should be derived from research, some designers try to only include persona traits if that exact trait was seen in a user interview. So they only include the traits if that is in the interview. This is useful for organizations that want to ensure that a strong user-centered methodology was followed and that designers aren't just making it up. But few interviewers state their goals succinctly out loud. Many times, the best code is one that embodies what many interviewers said, but no one particular interviewee said. So, most of the key goals or key motivations that is useful are things that is embodied by many interviewees, but no one interviewee said. If you receive pressure to ensure traceability, counter that personas are traceable to the patterns seen across research, not from specific idiosyncratic interviews. Quantifying personas, some design practitioners believe quantitative data is needed to validate personas. In fact, if you follow the process described in Chapter 2 and this chapter closely, you should have all the validation you need in the form of detailed qualitative information. The typical response to this from stakeholders or teams are very wed to quantitative data is, how do you know that this persona truly represent the majority of users? These questions come from a confusion of personas with market segments. We already systematically created the primary and secondary. Personas represent behaviors using a product, and in terms of the interface, do not always represent exclusive groupings. So the personas that represent behaviors using a product and in terms of the interface do not always represent exclusive groupings. A given interface design may support the needs of one or more secondary personas as well as supplemental personas in addition to the primary persona that determines the structure of that interface. So while the primary persona may not represent a majority of the market alone, the combination of primary, secondary, and supplemental persona served by an interface typically does. So that said, it can be useful to understand the market sizing of your personas. This is true especially when it's time for the development team to prioritize features at a detail level, taking into account the information about non-exclusive persona groupings. As mentioned in the preceding chapter, it is possible to construct persona personality surveys So that said, it can be useful to understand the market sizing of your personas. This is true especially when it's time for the development team to prioritize features at the detail level. As mentioned in the preceding chapter, it is possible to construct persona personality surveys that identify which persona each participant has the closest affinity to. The process for doing so is as follows. Revisit your behavioral variables and interview mappings to them. For each variable, construct a multiple choice question, then answer to which will distinguish between the different persona. Note that sometimes multiple persona will have similar behaviors for a given variable. Construct 2 to 4 more questions for each variable that ask the same question in a different way. This helps ensure that participants are answering accurately. Arrange the survey questions in random order. Fill the survey to participants. Sample size is important. You can use an online calculator such as surveysystem.com to find appropriate sample size for your product. Tabulate each participant responses, tracking how many answers match each persona. The persona with the most responses for a given participant is the persona that participant has an affinity to. Tabulate how many participants have an affinity to each persona and divide this number by the number of total participants. This is the market size percentage for your personas. Remember, it's okay if your primary persona isn't the largest segment. You also need to figure the effect of secondary and supplemental personas, all of whom will be using a single design. Organizational personas. Personas are a tool for characterizing people's behavior patterns. However, we have found that a similar but much simpler concept is also useful for describing the behavior of organization that our personas are employed by or affiliated with. For example, if you are designing a payroll system, the need for a small business and how the persona and it interact are different from those of multinational corporations. The personas are likely different, perhaps with more specialized roles than in a small business, and so is how they interact, and so, in addition, are the rules and behaviors of the business itself. You can imagine that this would also be true for other types of organizations for which you may need to design, perhaps even for social units such as families at the different stages of life. As you gathered information for your personas, you undoubtedly captured information about the organization they work for or were otherwise associated with. It is often helpful to develop aggregate fictional organizational personas with which to affiliate your personas using similar narrative approach. Usually an evocative organization name and one or two paragraphs describing organization's behavior and pain points regarding the product or service being designed are enough to provide necessary context. In place of photo, our designers have created logos for these companies for use in presentation materials. So when resources are limited, provisional personas are useful rhetorical tools to clearly communicate assumptions about who the important users are and what they need. These personas can also enforce rigorous thinking about serving specific user needs if these needs are not validated. Provisional personas are structured much like real personas but rely on available data and designer best guess about behaviors, motivations, and goals. They are typically based on combination of stakeholder and subject matter expert knowledge of users when available, as well as what is understood about users from existing market data. Provisional personas are in fact a more fleshed out persona hypothesis. Our experience is that regardless of lack of research, using provisional persona yields better results than no user models. Like real personas, provisional persona can help focus the product team and build consensus around the product, features, and behaviors. So it becomes a communication team tool that focuses the product team and build consensus about features and behaviors. Provisional personas are called this because they should be recognized as stand-ins for persona based on definitive qualitative data. While provisional persona may help focus your design and product team, if you do not have data to back up your assumptions, you may do the following. Focus on the result. So if you do not have data for this provisional, you will focus on the wrong design target, focus on the right target, but miss key behaviors that could differentiate your product. So this differentiation of design, just like as we find the desirability compared to viability and functionality, is important. Have a difficult time getting buy-in from individuals and groups who did not participate in their creation. So you don't have a reason for them to persuade. Discredit the value of persona, causing your organization to reject the use of personas in the long term. If you're using provisional personas, it's important to do the following. Clearly label and explain them as such. We often give them only first names. Represent them visually with sketches, no photos to reinforce their provisional nature. Try to use as much existing data as possible, market surveys, domain research, subject matter expert, field studies, or personas for similar products. Document what data was used and what assumptions were made. So document the data and the assumptions based on that data. Steer clear of stereotypes, which is more difficult to do without field data. Focus on behaviors and goals, not demographics and tasks. Other design models, personas are extremely useful tools, but they certainly not the only tool to help model users and their environment. Workflow or sequence models are useful for capturing information flow and decision-making processes inside their organization. They usually are expressed as flowcharts or directed graphs that capture several phenomena: a process goal or desired outcome, the frequency and importance of the process in each action, what initiates or prompts the execution of the process and each action, dependencies, what must be in place to perform the process and each action, as well as what is dependent on the completion of the product and each action. People who are involved in their roles and responsibilities, specific actions that are performed, decisions that are made, information that is used to support decisions, what can go wrong, errors and exception cases, how errors and exceptions are correlated. A well-developed persona should capture individual workflows, but workflows models are still necessary for capturing exhaustive, interpersonal, or organizational workflows. Interaction design based primarily on workflows often fails in the same way as implementation model. Software whose interaction is based primarily on its internal technical structure because workflow is to business what structure is to programming. Workflow-based design typically uses a kind of business implementation model that captures all of the functionality but little of the humanity. Artifacts model, as the name suggests, artifact models represent different artifacts that users employ in their tasks and workflows. Artifact model typically capture commonalities and significant differences between similar artifacts for the purpose of extracting and replicating best practice in the eventual design. Often these artifacts are online or paper forms. Artifact models can be useful later in the design process. Remember that direct translation of paper systems to digital systems without careful analysis of goals and application of design principles found uh, in the previous video usually leads to usability issues. Physical models like artifacts model endeavor to capture elements of the user environment. Physical models focus on capturing the layouts of physical objects that comprise the user workspace, which can provide insight into frequency of use issues and physical barriers to productivity. Good persona description incorporates some of this information, but it may be helpful in complex physical environments such as hospital floors and assembly lines to create discrete, detailed physical model maps or floor plans of the user environment. This and the persona models allows you to make sense of otherwise overwhelming and confusing data.